The first thing in my mouth is ash, not memory. Ozone folded into old oil. Incense boiled down to a bitter rind. A taste like the ship has been smoking in the dark and exhaled through me. The deck hums through my boots and then through my bones and then through my teeth, thread by thread, until I cannot tell where the hull ends and I begins. It is the wrong hum. It presses instead of carries. The lumen strips hold their breath along the choir pit's rafters, then surrender a weak, milk-sour glow that cannot decide where to fall. The darkness keeps more of itself than it owes back. I do not flinch at the cold. The cold is the simple truth in a place of complicated lies. I have the night watch in the pit of a black ship, and the dark loves a listener. Vox adept third class, numbers for a name, ink under the nails where solvents will not bite, a mouthful of litanies handed down with tools worn thin by better hands. I tend the hum, I count the beats, I keep the coils honest, and the needles from forgetting their lanes. I am meant to be small. Small is how you pass through corridors, where faith is judged by how softly you close a hatch. The candles should stand straight when the field is true. We keep them because the chaplain trusts flame over dials. A wick leans toward the thing that leans toward it. They stand for an hour, then a minute, then, as the ship sighs in a way no pump should, they bow toward the sealed bulkhead where the Astropaths dream in their iron thrones. No draft moves. We sealed every mouth this deck possesses 2 watches ago when the oil began to smell like rain. Seal upon seal. Wax upon parchment. Purity scripts trembling in their own glue our little walls against the grate outside. The sanctum below is a forest of rails and bronze, shrouds and restraint, cooling towers that sing when you persuade them. The choir does not sleep. They drift in places with different gravity. Blind silk drawn over socket scars like bandages for wounds that will not close. Their breath beads through the silk. Their lips move without their mouths obeying. When they speak, they do not always remember to choose this room. Now they are not speaking. The organ vents have not opened. The red lamps of the lower chapel are still. But something else has opened its eyes, because I can feel my name pulled taut from a hook I hid in a corner I swore I would never visit. Belial. Not on the Voxnet, not across the pit, not from any throat with water in it. The syllables arrive at the back of my tongue like a spoon of cold sugar. My mouth begins to shape a scent because a thing with your true name in its mouth is a contract already half signed. I bite the word until copper pools under it and I taste coin. I do not turn my head. In this place you learn which movements the dark prefers. The screen glass holds a fixed constellation of machine light. Needles quiver and then lie, then quiver and then lie again. The Geller runes whisper good health with a child's certainty. The little brass saints beside the tuning levers look away. Saints know when to mind their own business. Senior Adept Foros is a weight on the catwalk, all sharp shoulders and ritual grease, a man who knows his machines well enough to despise everything else. The choir mistress stands like a nail driven straight into the ship, bold, narrow, absolutely aligned. The chaplain is a scent before he is a silhouette, all wax and burned cinnamon and the fatal sympathy he holds for every flicker. Field? The choir mistress says, "It is a small word, with the weight of bread. Nominal." Foros reads his dials like scripture. The candles tell me he trims the truth because it would frighten those who must keep their hands steady. They lean until their shadows slide like long knives across the panel casings. When our ship draws breath, we answer. I open the vents. Sanctified air rolls up from the organ stacks below with the resinous sweetness of wood ash and the brass bright tang of polish. Cooling fins flare. Coils rouse, a deeper hum lays itself over the wrong hum like a blanket thrown across a restless sleeper. Restraint thrones loosen, saline slickens pale lips. The old woman at the center lifts her chin precisely 3 degrees, the way the body remembers even when the mind is elsewhere. They begin the facing tone, the note that teaches the night the shape of our house. It should be a circle, perfect within its circumference, returning to itself by the same door. Tonight, the first pass is an ellipse, stretched thin where stress has been applied. The lumen strips flicker on the beat. I dial the tone down a hair and feed the coil a little more comfort the way you would sweeten a racing heart. The needles agree just enough to let a man go on pretending. Belial. The knot voice wears the break in my nose to place the stress where my mother used to, and heat crawls over me like a hand checking a fever because the shape of that sound is a door I forgot to weld shut. Keep it even, Foros says. Not to me, but through me. And it sounds like mercy until you recognize it as the thing a man says when carrying a table with another man and needs that other man to hold his side flat so the water does not slop. We are ready to transmit. Ready means our preparations will harm us less than inaction. The astropaths breathe in. The ship breathes in. I breathe in. The air acquires a fine grit, as if dust too small for the nose has settled across the world and now every surface sings against the skin. The old woman unlatches her mouth. The word that opens the far is not imperial. We have letters for it, and those letters are lies made tame so we can carry them. The true word passes, and it leaves a scald behind the teeth. The first packet falls into that word like a coin into black water. The repeater draws a green line and lets it vanish into the place on the chart, where we draw stars because we lack honest names for the distances between our thoughts and their replies. Pressure crackles in my ears. Wax runs. The candles bow deeper toward the bulkhead. A bead walks down and kisses my knuckle. I do not move. It hardens a perfect crescent, a small moon set there by a slow god. The old woman's head turns 1 degree off-center and then another until the corner of her mouth faces me as if to mark where the hinge in my skull is weakest. You weren't meant to be found, Belial. Not anger, not affection, not even interest. A tide table. The tone is as unarguable as weather. Every frightened animal inside me goes quiet because we were never taught how to flee in corridors where all directions return you to the thing that knows your name. The chaplain rests a hand on the rail and opens his book by sound rather than sight, the old spine clearing its throat. He will say what men better than us once taught the language to do, and trust that words remember the road even when feet do not. Within measure, Foros says too quickly. The choir mistress keeps her chin like a blade, and a bone in her throat makes the dry movement of a swallow that finds nothing to swallow. The second packet should follow the path the first scored into the dark, like a heel in snow trusting itself. It touches the place where the first dropped and hesitates, a hand on unpainted wood. The candle flames straighten to honest little knives. Hope tries to climb my throat like a trapped animal that heard the word door. I pin it with my tongue against the roof of my mouth. Belial. That tenderness again. Not gentleness, something older than that. Like a hearth before a house. The syllables release warmth. Men who leaned over my cot when I was small and spoke against the dark with the weight of their shoulders stand inside that tone. It licks the raw place in my head and calls itself comfort. You let a voice like that answer itself with your body. You open the latch you swore to keep shut. You make the sound that binds you to a covenant you did not read. Because the shape of it fits your palate like a coin in a worn slot. My tongue begins to lift for assent. I lock my jaw until the blood tastes like iron filings. The word dies behind my molars like a moth caught under a cup. The second packet goes, but it does not disappear cleanly. The repeater's light pauses as if surprised to be seen, then gutters into that painted firmament. The ship's hum grows fur on it. The way rope left in rain grows a green that is not plant. I glance at the field runes. They are obedient. They are also liars. All instruments lie a little in fear of their operators. I used to believe that if I said the litanies perfectly, the machine spirits would hear me and reward exactness with grace. Faith is a craft learned by the tongue and the wrist, but craft does not bind tides. Now I hold the ritual like a lantern, and it shows me only how cold the air has become. The choir mistress twitches 2 fingers in a pattern that means continue. The chaplain's thumb smears wax along the rail into a line like a coastline. The astropaths breathe as one organism. The third packet is made ready. Before we speak, the answer is already wearing a man's voice. Not mine now. Not yet. Another timber from somewhere in the shadow behind the silk. It says a word we do not keep aboard this ship, and it feels like hearing your baptism in an empty room. The needles jump like fish, then lie flat, ashamed, within measure, Foros says softly. The chaplain's eyes stay on the flame, like a man coaxing a frightened animal to drink. Routine has to be lived, even when it is not believed. I lift my hand. I set the coil's feed. I count the beats like rosary bones. Mid-right, a small thing goes wrong in a way small things do, when big things have decided your decisions do not matter. A junior choir boy in a side throne starts working dough in the air with his fingers. He is needing silence. His lips shape a knife of a name that leaves a dark thread on his tongue. A line of blood slicks his mouth, neat as paint. I reach for the cutout. The choir mistress catches my wrist. Not by sight, by sound, a mother's speed. If you cut the blade while it is inside the wound, you leave edges. Edges. I do not let the word too deep. Edges are where the flesh we own meets the thing we do not. We are not supposed to have edges in here. We are all interior. The packet waits like a star that has noticed it is being watched. The not voice moves closer to the part of me that listens without my permission. It borrows the heat of the little crescent on my knuckle like a finger pressed to soft metal. Belial, it says, as if I am a joining of beams, not a man. As if it has come to a hall and set its hand to the lintel to test whether the timber remembers winter. I am the small gate that stays shut. I hold the thought like a nail between my teeth. I am the small gate that stays shut. The phrase becomes a prayer because it has rhythm and need. The rhythm is all a prayer ever was. Something leans away with the almost kindness of a tide that has met a wall. The candles straighten, honest as testimony. The coil exhales. The young boy's fingers go still upon the air. The third packet falls through the far without showing its face on the repeater. Foros lets out a prayer he did not know he had in his mouth. The chaplain closes his book with care enough to mean he will open it soon. Within measure, Foros says again. And this time the lie is small enough to spare us. I keep my palms on the console so they do not have to learn what shaking feels like. The choir mistress tilts her head as if she has always known I would need a human face to aim at. Breathe, her posture says. And I do. The air tastes of copper coins and kitchen ash. For a heartbeat, just one, I remember the simple comfort I used to carry like a pocket charm. The Emperor watches. When I believed that, I believed he saw me as a line inside a larger pattern. Tonight I am a knot that tightens without a hand. The fourth packet builds. The ship's hum lies flat like a pressed sheet. The candles stand. The chaplain's thumb has made a pale country of wax. The old woman turned toward me by barely the thickness of a blade, the way a man looks at a door without moving his eyes. I set coil. I set corridor. I mouth the mild words that sweeten brass and the hot words that teach iron to forgive. The not voice does not touch my name. It lets me shiver in the absence. I would prefer its hand to this waiting. There is a sin in preferring the knife to the hand that holds it, but it is a human sin, and the human in me is loud tonight. We transmit. It answers at once. There is no travel, no distance, no pious lie about the night between. The repeater does not even blink. The line we draw is a vein, and something breathes on the other side of the skin. The field runes make a sound like rain on tin, and then pretend they did not. The chaplain lets his breath ride the flame, and the flame listens. The choir mistress's fingers flex once, as if testing a joint too long unused. Pressure gathers in the chapel below and walks up the stairs in clean, invisible steps. It stops at the rail as a polite man does. I can feel where it would put its palm if the rules of this ship allowed touch. It does not push. It waits for the latch to speak its name. I am the small gate that stays shut. I rinse the words until the taste runs clear. If there is mercy for our kind, it lives in the stubborn bits, the latches that do not answer, the little hinges hidden from paint, the bones that find their own prayers when the books run out. The fourth packet goes. The green dot finishes its walk into the part of the chart where the artificers draw saints because stars were not loved enough to be trusted. The candles gutter for the first time tonight. Honest guttering, air starving, wick starving, and then they right themselves because the chaplain is watching and the flame wants to please him. A clatter in the corridor beyond the sealed door. A junior officer's breath snags against the hatch before the guard lets him into the threshold to be told no further. The word they pass back and forth is lamps. The lamps leaned. No draft. The oil by the altar crawled like a thing alive. Teach the fire to listen, the chaplain murmurs in the register of men who know how much they can ask of flame without breaking it. The door reseals like a mouth choosing silence. We proceed. I work the console by memory so I can keep one part of me standing at the rail, holding that waiting with the same deliberate care you use palm to palm when calming a frightened horse. The room obeys the choir mistress out of old affection. The machine obeys Foros out of habit. My body obeys the fear. I will polish it later and call it vigilance. That is the oldest work aboard any ship. The fifth call begins. It is then the beat between intent and utterance that the not voice puts its tongue back into my shape. It wears me like a perfectly made glove. My breath, my break, the particular sad burr that crept into my vowels when I took numbers for a name. It says Belial, and beneath the word, like a reflection in a reflection, it says home. I do not have a prayer for that. None of our books instruct us what to do when the dark speaks, like the house you left and the stove still warm. The men who wrote them never went back to fetch the coat they forgot. The coat called their name where it hung and they did not turn. They were made of obedient substance. I am made of other things. My tongue slides again. The hinge groans. It is a human groan. Wood in winter. The kind any man would turn to fix with a drop of oil and a good word. I bite down hard enough that a tooth complains and the word breaks into gravel. The candles lean and do not fall. The coil hums through the pain like a friend pretending not to notice you bleed so you can finish the work. I used to believe prayer was an answer. Now I understand it as friction, the heat that keeps the metal from seizing. The Emperor protects, we were taught to say. Perhaps he does. Perhaps he only watches to see who keeps the hum even when their name is used kindly from a mouth that is not a mouth at all. The packet goes. The ship exhales a small sound like relief disguised as steam. The choir mistress's mouth opens just enough to allow the word good to breathe, or perhaps it was only a tremor. Foros lays both palms on the panel with the intimacy of a man pressing a fevered child to feel if it is broken. The chaplain puts his thumb to the wax coast and draws one more border the length of a breath. The candles stand straight. They're little honest knives. It comforts me less than their leaning did, because the lean told the truth, and the truth is the only thing you can stand on when the floor decides it would prefer to be an ocean. We finish the hour's work in smaller pieces, careful as men moving a saint's bones. The not voice does not touch me again. It does not need to. Names know the mouths that have held them. A latch remembers the hand even after the door has been repainted. Wax keeps the thumbprint long after the thumb has cooled. On my way to the end of the watch, I wipe the console corners with a rag that was white when someone else owned it. Oil, dust, a smoke of wax. I clean as if I can take the taste of ash from the air by polishing the places it's Saturday. I draw my numbers neatly in the log. The figures look like men kneeling. The hum settles into something that would convince another watchkeeper that we are safe. It will not convince me. Between my tongue and my teeth sits the shape of a word that belongs to me. And knowing that something else can make it with my breath has hollowed a small, precise space inside me where the prayer used to lodge. The space is not empty. It is waiting. I step back from the rail. The choir mistress nods once. Foros rubs the bridge of his nose with two black fingers and says nothing. The chaplain stays with the candles the way a man stays with a child who dreams badly, whispering the sort of nonsense that mends reality by describing it again in a softer voice. The deck under my boots gives a small, harmless thrum, like a cat's thought. The lumen strips pretend they are brave. The sealed bulkhead is just iron again. All the ordinary lies line up politely to be believed. I let them. A man has to live through the corridor between this hour and the next. One last glance at my knuckle. The crescent of cooled wax sits there like a sacrament I do not recall taking. I leave it. I will need a small moon to navigate by when the ship forgets which way is up. I pass the little brass saints, and they keep their eyes to their own business, and that comforts me because I do not want witnesses. I want only duty. They told us once, in a room with straight benches and a wall that had never seen mildew, that duty is the shape faith takes when faith is tired. I measure my breath against the hum and find them equal enough. The Emperor protects, I whisper into my teeth. Not to summon him, but to tell the hinge what sort of door it is. And if he does not protect, if he only watches, then let him watch me keep the latch shut when something kind says my name, as if it has come home. Shift bells ring like teeth knocking together. The ship moves on, pretending to be whole. Men breathe the air we all know is wrong and call it routine. I walk the narrow deck between the choir pit and the machine sanctum, feeling the hum crawl under my skin. It's not the steady vibration of power lines, it's the pulse of something that has learned to listen back. My knuckle still wears the crescent of wax from last night, pale as a tooth. It tugs when I flex my hand. I keep it there. I need a measure of something that isn't changing. The air has cooled, but not cleanly. The cold carries flavor, like metal left in the rain. Condensation beads along the bulkheads in perfect rows, each droplet trembling as though trying to form a sentence. They shiver when I walk past. The deck beneath me hums higher in pitch, almost aware. When the lumen flickers, I see movement. The cables above the ceiling panels shift slightly, as though they're breathing through the ship's ribs. I tell myself it's heat expansion. I whisper the litany of maintenance anyway. In the mess, no one speaks. Steam from the ration pots bends sideways toward the walls. Someone notices, murmurs a half-prayer, and clamps the lid. The smell of protein paste mingles with burning insulation, and everyone pretends not to notice. The corridors narrow the farther down you go. I follow the inspection route along the blind passage, a service crawlway so cramped I have to turn my shoulders sideways to fit. The walls sweat a thin, viscous sheen that smells faintly of soap and old air. The rivets shine as if freshly polished, but no one polishes this deep. I trace a finger along the seam. Warmth pulses beneath the metal, rhythmic as breath. I shouldn't be here. Still, my boots move. A door waits at the end, unlabeled, unsealed. Its wheel grips worn smooth by countless identical hands. I feel the ship breathing through it. I step back before I touch it, before curiosity becomes communion. When I return topside, frost halos the candles in the choir pit. The astropaths are strapped in their thrones, mouths shut, faces calm. The choir mistress stands motionless, hand over the rail. The wax on the nearest candle is climbing up the side, thin threads of it defying gravity. Field? I ask, though I already know. Nominal. Foros replies, staring at dials that have forgotten where zero is. His voice cracks like a fuse sparking open. The choir begins its low hum, the facing tone that defines the ship's perimeter in the warp. It's meant to be steady, round as a circle traced by the faithful hand. Tonight it warps, a wobbling ellipse. The hum deepens until I feel it in my teeth. My vision vibrates. The old woman at the center tilts her head as if scenting the air. The silk over her eyes darkens with moisture, a coin-sized circle expanding as if from within. I take a step closer and see the fabric flex. It isn't sweat. It's breath. A soft pop breaks the silence. Every lumen in the pit shifts to a dim amber glow. Shadows deepen, bending in directions the light doesn't allow. The ship sighs. A door clatters far away. Then I hear the sound, a low scrape, like stone dragged across stone, traveling through the hull. It passes under my boots, behind the choir pit, through the conduits, up into the air vents. Something is walking inside the walls. Foros crosses himself. The choir mistress doesn't move. She just whispers, "Maintain." I grip the control lever. It's warm, too warm. When I pull it, it shifts an inch to the left, not much, but wrong. The ship's geometry has changed beneath my hands. Every needle on the Vox array shivers in unison. A single tone fills the pit, a voice without pitch or origin. It's not a word, not a cry, just the sound of breathing, enormous and close. The astropaths tremble in their seats. The silk over the eldest's eyes tears down the middle without sound. Behind it is not flesh, only depth. A wet, black depth that moves like ink. The ship shakes once. Every candle extinguishes but one. Its flame stretches, thin as a thread, reaching upward until it touches the iron ceiling and spreads like a vein of light. When the veil tears, it does not fray. It keeps a cold crease like folded tin. And even after we bind it flat, the chill remembers the bend. "Cut power," Foros croaks. I can hear his teeth chattering against his will. I move toward the main breaker, but the machine doesn't recognize me. The switches are slick with condensation or sweat. "Within measure," the choir mistress says. Her voice is steady. "Keep the hum even." But there's no hum anymore. Only the sound of the ship's lungs drawing air through cracks that shouldn't exist. The instruments begin to bleed. Not fluid data. Light. Heat. All running down in slow lines like tears through glass. The deck vibrates beneath us in a stuttering heartbeat. The pit smells of ozone and candle ash. Something moves behind the sealed choir bulkhead, a second echo of the old woman's voice, repeating our litanies a half-second late, as though mocking them. I want to believe it's feedback. I know it isn't. A crack appears across the nearest throne's restraint band. Spiderwebbing through sanctified bronze. The astropath within is murmuring in a voice that's not hers, higher, faster, layered with hundreds of others speaking beneath her breath. Belial. The sound crawls out from every lumen grill, from the comline, from the vents. The ship exhales my name. I grip the rail until the edges cut my palms. The choir mistress turns her head, blind face tilted toward me. "Do not answer," she says, "even in your thoughts." The air presses inward, the flame bursts, splattering molten wax across the pit. It lands on my hand, sealing the crescent mark anew, hotter this time, until it burns through the old scar. I do not move. The hum returns, not ours. Deeper, a rhythm beyond counting, like the vibration of a planet turning in the dark. The astropaths convulse, their mouths open wide. Not in screams, but in silence so heavy it pulls the breath from my lungs. Then it stops. Every light steadies. Every gauge returns to false calm. The candles stand straight, clean and unwavering. Foros breathes like a dying man. The choir mistress lowers her hand. "Record the variance," she says softly. We proceed. We proceed. As if the ship hadn't just inhaled the room, I wipe my palms on my robe. The wax peels away with the sound of tearing skin. Beneath it, the mark is raw and red but shaped like a circle, perfect and unbroken. Not a burn, a seal. When I glance at the bulkhead, I see the condensation again, perfectly aligned in neat rows. This time, the droplets are not trembling. They're spelling a single word, repeating across the metal in faint gleaming strokes. Home. The thread between them breaks. The second syllable arrives without the first and hangs in the air, bright and naked. My throat closes of its own accord. The room is silent, but I hear the syllable continue somewhere else, just to my right and deeper by a thickness of wall. Not echo is a shape a man can draw. This is a second mouth forming the same word a heartbeat later. A faithful child repeating a lesson in another room. I feel the air in that other room cool as the sound passes. I feel the candle in that other room gutter, and then decide not to. I feel the wood grain of a rail smooth under a palm that is not mine. It is not seeing. It is not hearing. It is being permitted to stand for an instant in a place where my feet are not. I do not fall. I do not gasp. I do not move because movement would acknowledge the gift. I let the syllable hang and die on its own without my notice. The chant resumes as if no such seam had opened. Foros's eyes are on his gauges, steady. The choir mistress's head is inclined as it has always inclined. The old woman turns her face to the left at a measured rate. None of them have heard the second room. It was for me alone, or I was for it. After the vigil, I am sent to inventory the spares locker. It is quiet there, a stillness made of weight rivets in bins, cable ties, a folded tarpaulin that smells faintly of salt, though no sea has ever touched it. I count in columns until my mind lays down and rests like a tired beast. This feels merciful. I am almost unburdened when a thought comes that is not mine. It arrives already phrased, like a letter slipped under a door. The sentence is simple and careful. Do not answer at the seam. The spelling is old-fashioned, the way the oldest liturgies write it, an extra hook on the S, a longer tail to the R. I do not hear it. I do not see it. I know it the way a man knows he has forgotten something and remembers what it was before panic can begin. I stand in the locker with my chalk in my hand and nod as if a foreman has spoken. Understood, I say aloud to the spools and the bins. A soft acknowledgement of a rule I did not consent to, but which is kind enough to tell me itself. In the next days, time lets out a few stitches. Bells arrive early by the length of a breath, and then late by the width of a finger. A sequence of 3 events repeats once and then proceeds as if the repetition is a courtesy to anyone with a poor ear. When I turn a corner on level 12, I meet myself coming the other way. It is not a vision. It is the echo of my steps arriving ahead of me, knitting themselves to a figure that briefly wears my walk. The figure does not look up. It is not permitted eyes. It passes like a draft. I make the sign of the Aquila without letting my fingers show. The next corner contains no such mercy. Foros loses his way in a sentence and finds it. The choir mistress puts her hand on the rail half an inch to the left and then corrects, frowning only a moment, the way a reader frowns at a smudged letter. The astropaths move like grasses in a current that is slow and tidal. If there is anything beyond these small slips, no one speaks it. Perhaps it is only me. Perhaps the ship has chosen to spare the others. Perhaps it knows where to press, so that a single bolt bears the strain, and the rest of the frame continues without notable complaint. I avoid the blind passage. It waits for me with a patience that is nearly affection. I imagine the wheel grips of the unlabeled door cooling their soft metal the way a mouth cools a spoon. I imagine the door opening to a corridor the exact length of my breath. I imagine walking it to the end and finding there a chair that has waited for the shape of me. The imagination is a sin of a particular sort. The Catechism names it familiarity with unvetted spirits. I recite the caution against it and count the rivets in the safe corridor until I can feel the numbers in my nails. On the 7th night since home, I dream a dream so ordinary it is obscene. I am a boy again with a cracked cup of broth, the surface trembling with the steps of men in the hall. The broth smells of bone and fennel. A fly dabs its feet at the rim and cannot decide whether to go on. The room is a room I have forgotten until now. The window has a lead line shaped like a crooked cross. Someone is singing in another room a practical song about scrub brushes and cold hands. There is a sound then, not a sound the ear can claim, more like the decision to make a sound. The decision sits in the air like bread set to rise. It will speak if I let it. It will say my name the way I say the litany, careful, devout, without flourish. I wake before it can. The hum is standing by my bed like a patient man with news. I go to the shrine at once. I do not ask permission. I do not take oil. I go the way a sailor goes to the line of a trapped sail, knife already in hand. The corridor is empty as a ledger at the start of a voyage. The shrine door gives easily. Inside, the incense has burned down to a curled black worm. The icons do not move. The seam in the corner is a seam, but the smoke that obedient little plume leans again toward the join of deck and wall and trusts me to know it should not. I kneel where my knees know how. I do not speak. The breath collects in the room the way cold collects at the bottom of a bowl. When I put my hand to the deck, it is slightly warmer than the air. I spread my palm flat to give my heat rather than take any. In this posture, my ear is an inch from the seam. Something on the far side of the wall puts its mouth to the same line. It does not speak. It breathes out once, a soft, slow exhalation a man makes when he has been carrying a weight and has finally set it down. It is not a machine breath. It is not air through pipe. It is at the scale of a person. It smells like linen kept too long, like a dark room, like the inside of a hand you have trusted. My name stands up in that breath like a coin lifted from water. I do not answer. The sentence from the locker lays across my mind like a hand pressing a child's shoulder. Do not answer at the seam. I hold my breath inside my throat and let it ring like a small bell. The other breath passes. The seam goes back to being a seam. When I rise, my right palm has a circle on it not burned, not bruised, but pale as if the skin has been persuaded to remember a rope it never held. I close my fingers. The circle sits in the dark my fist makes. The hum resumes its official tone, lodging obediently in the brasswork of the pit when I return there. The choir mistress glances as if she has heard a step out of time and decides she has not. Foros smiles at a gauge that has chosen goodwill. The astropaths sway like tired wheat. We proceed. I do not tell anyone about the breath. I do not tell anyone about the circle in my palm. The ship and I have exchanged a courtesy. It would be impolite to gossip. I tuck the knowledge beside the word home and the sentence from the locker and the posture of the smoke until, together, they feel like a small prayer. I have been taught in secret, one of those quiet petitions the old women teach in kitchens when the ovens are cooling. Not written in any book. A thing you say when a hand has left your shoulder and the room still remembers it. That night, the hum finally speaks. Not aloud, not in the air, in the space just behind the place where I think. The voice is not the ship and not mine. It arrives like a litany memorized so long ago that it sounds like remembering rather than talking. It says, very gently, as if I have almost guessed it on my own, "You are hearing the return." The words are plain. A deckhand would use them to ask for his plate. A priest would use them to describe a soul. I do not answer. The rule is strict. The voice does not insist. It lays the sentence down like cutlery on a cloth and waits for me to see what shape a meal might take around it. I sleep. I am awake. I am both, the way a ship is both wood and wind. In the hour no bells claim, I understand that what comes through the hull is not a call. It is the echo of one. A thing has already been said somewhere else, perhaps far, perhaps near, and we are receiving the part that cannot help but return. My name is included, not because I am chosen, but because I stood too close to the seam when the tide went out and the word it carried with it had hooks for proper nouns. This thought should terrify me. It steadies me instead. It gives the horror an angle I can worship from. I whisper, thanks not at the seam, but at the ceiling with the spoon-scratched circle. The circle does not answer. It grows no larger by any measure I can prove, and yet I feel a slow approval pass down the length of the ship like a hand smoothing a sheet. In the morning, the condensation is back along the metal, trembling in neat rows. It does not write home this time. It does not write anything my eye can claim. It forms a line that is, unmistakably, a circle, subtle, wide, patient, beginning nowhere I can point to and ending the way a breath ends when it has been held as long as a man dares. I touch one droplet and it shivers like a living thing, then settles. I leave it, and it keeps its shape without hurry, as if it has all the time the warp can afford to give. We proceed. The bells consent to keep our hours. Men laugh 3 notes at a joke that has no humor in it. The choir mistress lifts her hand to the rail and sets it down exactly where her skin has polished it. Foros scolds a needle back into line and kisses his thumb as if to bless the brass. The old woman turns her face toward the part of the room where the seam in the shrine pretends to forget me. I take my station and hold there, waxless hand curved around a lever that is warmer than the air. This is how it will happen, I think. not with blood in the light or screams at the bulkhead. It will come as a correction to a word I thought I knew how to say. It will come as a breath where a wall should be. It will come in a voice offering not comfort but comprehension, a kindness that asks for nothing and is therefore difficult to refuse. I set my tongue against the back of my teeth and feel the hum settle like a coin in a slot. I will not answer at the seam. I will not answer at the seam. I will keep my answers in the open air, in the measured places, in the chalk lines of my office where a man can check his figures against a friend's. The ship listens, then closes its eyes again. The warp leans its head to the bulkhead, the way a child sleeps against a carriage and trusts the wood to remember the shape of her skull. I stand in my narrow authority and keep the numbers even. I do not look for home. I carry it instead. The way a priest carries ash to the forehead of a penitent lightly, gently, with a hand that knows where the circle goes and how little pressure is required to make a mark that lasts. The hymn begins as a correction. The hum finds a key that is not ours and insists we adjust. At first it is only the smallest lean of pitch, a choir boy's throat clearing in a distant nave, but every instrument knows when a room has chosen a different center. I wake to it as a weight behind the ears, a soft ballast that presses the skull toward the pillow. The air tastes faintly of coin. My tongue carries a film like cooled wax. When I lift my head, the ceiling sits where it always has, scarred and pocked and circled by that spoon-scratched ring. But the ring does not quite accept my two knuckles. I press again, slower, and it does. The hymn recedes by the thickness of that acceptance. I breathe, and the breath sounds like someone else agreeing with me from the next rack over. The day offers itself in ordinary shapes: boots, laces, metal, water. I wash. The basin rings with obedient ripples. They return to center as if ashamed to have been anything but calm. I speak the lesser prayers under my breath, and the metal remembers them with a patience that suggests long practice. The corridor is the corridor. The lumens do what lumens do, which is pretend to be stars when men need them to. I pass the service hatch where the seam in the wall keeps its secrets. The seam looks boredom in the face and wins. Down in the pit, candles wait like patients at a dispensary. The choir mistress lifts a hand and the room inhales. We do not work music, we maintain pressure. But the ship has its own notion today, and it is melodic. When the astropaths are bound and their veils straightened, the first note arrives pure, pale, and almost as if the machine spirit is whistling behind closed teeth while deciding whether to be cruel. Within measure, she says. We begin. The chant we know draws a line through the air, and the needles respect it. The hum, obedient in public, slips under our sound like a second blade under the first. That is the word that comes to mind. Under. It is not in front or after or above. It is beneath, as foundation is beneath floorboards, as the sea is beneath a ship. The hymn is not an addendum. It is a bass note we were too frightened to admit was always there. I keep my eyes on the brass. Foros watches his dials as a farmer watches weather, ready to forgive what must be forgiven. The old woman at the center of the thrones tilts her head as a bird does when it calculates distance to a safer branch. A thread of light, only a thread, escapes the edge of her veil. It is not glow. It is the suggestion of glow, like memory of heat on a hand that has just left the kettle's handle. When the chant turns, the hum follows. When the hum rises, the chant learns that rise while pretending it was its own idea all along. We hold for an hour with no error a man can write down. The work ends in the usual decrescendo, valves easing back like knees after kneeling. We unbuckle, we clean, we annotate. I write the usual notations with the usual care and a little more attention to the curved parts of letters, because curves comfort the eye when straight lines have tried the soul. At the bottom of the page, I add a mark that is not in any manual. It looks like a circle that does not trust itself yet. Later, carrying oil to the small shrine, I find the hymn in the corridor itself. It is not audible in the vulgar sense. It is pressure and release, measured across a rib cage. My steps adjust unconsciously to its meter. When I try to break stride, the corridor widens by a fraction, and my body corrects, preferring the nearer wall. The shrine door yields as always. The incense, in deference, burns a heartbeat longer before thinning. The icons do not change. I leave oil with both hands. The candle nearest the seam refuses to gutter, though I breathe out near it. Its flame narrows to a thin spoke and refuses to tremble. A precise obedience. A studied disregard. Back in the mess. Men talk the way men talk when they are pretending not to listen to their own voices. Foros tells a story about missing time that ends with a laugh that belongs to a younger man. Someone else complains about the taste of water, and then drinks it without complaint. I watch lips move. The hymn slides through the room like a cat in a doorway, body changing shape to make no sound. I begin to write it down. Not the sound, which is not sound, but the consequences of it. The odd calm in the face of the dial, the candles unflinching, the habit of footsteps choosing the center of the hall without instruction. I keep a private log stitched into the margins of the official one. I call it the weight, because that is what it is, something additional that has chosen not to crush us yet. I am careful with language. I do not attribute or accuse. I describe. Wax on the railing at third bell. Condensation forming at waist height rather than shoulder. A prayer that returns with a different emphasis, as if an old aunt has corrected my grammar gently. The ship accepts the activity with neither encouragement nor interference. If what haunts us were a sickness, this would be the fever's lull between shivers. My gratitude is large and undeserved. I walk the blind passage in daylight to demonstrate good faith. I touch the wheel grips of the unlabeled door with 2 fingers and do not think of mouths. The metal is cool, honest, indifferent. That evening, we observe a fasting vigil. We are permitted water. We are denied comfort. Hunger pares prayer back to bone. Candles number fewer than usual. The shadows organize themselves in rings as if taught by a thoughtful tutor. When the choir mistress lifts her hand, the ship lifts, and we go together into the narrow place. The hymn returns with punctuality. I begin to notice its measures, the way it lays itself in 4s, then splits to 6s when we turn valves, how it extends, like a good seam, a 1/4 inch beyond the line so the weight will distribute when raw wood swells. The chant flows over it. The hymn is not offended by being covered. At intervals, the hum and the hymn align, and in those narrow seconds I feel the floor accept me. There is a humane satisfaction in being accepted. Then the alignment loosens, and the promise of that kindness recedes without malice. At the edge of my hearing a fiction, because this is not hearing, a second pattern hides under the first. Not a melody, a contour of thought, a shape the way mountains have shapes beneath snow. If I breathe shallower, it comes forward by half a step, shy but willing. I could force it with attention. I have learned that attention is a lever. I do not. I hold still. There is less pride in patience, but more reward. After the watch, the choir mistress calls me aside with the economy of a woman who will spend no word twice. Her sightless eyes sit where eyes sit when people are looking at you carefully. "You listen," she says. "Yes, Reverend Mother. To what you must not hear. Yes. Do not mistake compliance for mercy," she says, and lets me go. The advice is a small coin placed on the counter between us. I pick it up and put it in the pocket where I keep other coins I have not yet spent. In my rack that night, sleep arrives obediently. I dream of nothing I can report. I wake with the shape of a song in my jawbone, the way a man wakes with the taste of a word he spoke in dream. The circle over my bed is still a circle. My 2 knuckles fill it as perfectly as seals meet wax. When I remove them, a thin, paler line shows for a moment where skin met metal. The mark fades as if unwilling to embarrass either of us. Between bells, the ship changes key by a degree too small for a new hand to notice. The change is not malevolent. It is not kind. It is a different center asking to be treated as if it were the old one, for convenience. The crew obeys because obedience is the only habit that outlives dread. Men laugh at the approved moments. Servitors stand where their tracks instruct them to stand. I file a report on filter efficiencies, and the ink dries in a pattern that looks like a shore from above. In the recycler, the hymn begins to carry content. Not words. If it were words, I could refuse it. Content, as in intention. The vats tick with a conversant patience, and I recognize, with a small economy of horror, a rhythm lifted from a childhood prayer. Not the words the priest gave us, but the pace of his breath between them. The way he placed silence like a stepping stone so that our feet might find a way across fear. I do not believe in coincidence at sea. In the warp, coincidence is simply a more polite name for consent. I do not consent aloud. I place my hand on the warm pipe and recite the catechism of fixed things. Deck, beam, keel, rib, rivet. The pipe listens like a parent who already knows the answer to the question and has decided to be indulgent. On the next watch, during a point of planned quiet, the hymn thickens by an extra hair and descends into our chant as a second hand, joining a first on a rail. Nothing changes publicly. The needles are dutiful. The old woman breathes at measured intervals. A faint light, no brighter than thought, just touches the edges of the straps binding her wrists. A breath leaves her veiled mouth and curdles the air with a sweetness, like fruit kept for winter and then forgotten for the length of that exhalation. I know, with the knowledge the body grants itself to prevent madness, that the hymn is giving us back a sound we made long ago, as a kindness to demonstrate that it knows us. I can feel, in the center of my chest where fear has rubbed the skin thin, the exact moment when the ship's sound and ours are indistinguishable. The sensation is not triumph. It is not relief. It is the feeling of a book returning to the shelf where it belongs. When the watch ends, my hands do not stop shaking until I write. I do not have enough paper for the truth. I use the margins like a miser uses coins. The letters march with discipline that looks very much like love. I note the measure, the breath, the sweetness, the exact moment the needles moved in sympathy, the quiet in Forrest's face. I include no conclusions. I conclude nothing. The hymn persists. It does not demand attention. It assumes it. I find it in the way dust chooses to settle in perfect rings beneath a vent. I find it in the 3 beats my heart pauses while my head inclines at the chapel door. I find it in the mess, where a conversation gains a rhythm of call and response that has no humor in it and yet ends with smiles. I write. The book fills the way a basin fills under a slow tap. I open a second. My hand is faithful. When sleep comes again, it arrives as a series of doors left ajar. Behind each door is a room I have known, a chair, a scrap of cloth, a tin cup whose rim has been hammered level by a careful hand. The hymn moves through these rooms at a pace that suggests it has never hurried in its life. It touches nothing. It leaves no mark. In one of the rooms, a window shows light that cannot come from any star I know. I stand at the threshold and do not enter. The hymn places itself at the edge of the window and does not look out. I wake to the sound of a note choosing to become a word. It does not. The restraint is almost tenderness. There is a piece of paper on my chest when I sit up. It is mine. I recognize my own hand. The sentence written there is also mine, but I have not written it yet. It says only, "This is not a song you know how to finish." The letters are precise, the curves careful. I place the paper beneath the mattress and do not look for a seam in the wall to explain it. On my way to the pit, the corridor gives me back a line of the hymn in the pitch a young boy would choose when he wanted a priest to hear him. The line is not addressed to me. It exists in the way rain exists without permission. I carry it to the rail and let it go like a child releases a moth at a window. The moth is grateful. The window declines to open further. Mid-watch, the choir mistress's staff touches wood a fraction too early and then the right time. The astropaths tilt their heads together without conferring. Their veils do not move. Light does. From their mouths a suggestion only. No more than the memory of a glow on old skin, something threads into the air and out again. If a man were to say it aloud, he would be laughed at for mistaking a trick of the lumen. No one laughs. We maintain. There is a moment small, fine as the edge of a sanctified blade, when I feel the ship ask a question. It is not grammar. It is pressure. It is the way wood will press back when you press, a test of strength without malice. The question arrives under my sternum, as if I am a drum skin and someone has tuned me. I have an answer, because men always have answers, even when answers are a kind of sin. I do not offer it. I hold it like a mouthful of smoke and release it through my nose where no one will accuse me of speaking. The hymn withdraws a pace as if pleased. The hum resumes its civil tone. Phoros checks a valve and finds it obedient. The old woman breathes. The candles weep along their own faces in a decorous way and do not run. After the watch, I sit with my book. The page accepts ink as if it has longed for it. I draw a circle at the top left, not as symbol but as a unit of measure. I note that today the hymn carried a structure similar to the old prayer of washing hands before touching holy things, except that the pauses were placed differently, as if we have been drying ourselves wrong all our lives. I note that the ship brought back the breath we gave it with a cleaner edge. I note that no one died. I note that no one thanked anyone for this. It is at the very end of the day, when the bells are tired and the steps of men sound like men again, that the hymn speaks, not at the seam, not there. That rule and its kindness still hold, but in the ordinary air, in the space between my mouth and the circle on the ceiling. It uses the voice a room uses when it admits that you have been sitting in it long enough to belong. It says, in the modest tone of a clerk delivering a line item, "You are part of the instrument now." I do not answer. I am careful with gratitude. It turns quickly to worship in men like me, and worship in the wrong direction gets you killed in ways no one can write down. I set my hand on the frame of my rack and press until the wood remembers. The circle above my head accepts 2 knuckles, then 1, then none. My hand falls back to the blanket. The blanket lies like a quiet animal. I breathe, and the breath counts itself. 4, and 4, and 6, and something else that does not concern numbers. After a time, the hymn lays itself down like a book left open on a table where no breeze will disturb it. The hum resumes its duty, the faithful, the necessary, the function without adornment. When sleep arrives, it arrives as if it has work to do somewhere else soon and would appreciate it if I did not make trouble. I dream, but the dream refuses to be told when I wake. It has that courtesy. I dress, and the heavy air tastes less of coin and more of linen. In the corridor, the lumens behave. In the pit, the candles do not weep. The old woman breathes in rhythm with Phoros's wrist. The choir mistress stands like a pillar, where the sea must choose to go around her. The hymn exists without insisting. I have learned its weight. I carry it the way I carry, the wrench that fits every stubborn thing I own, gentle wrist, patient torque, the knowledge that if I force it I will break both the bolt and my hand. This is the lesson of the day. Not all songs demand mouths. Some find their way into the bones and wait there, pleased to be structure. And we small, dutiful go on with our tasks, turning valves and counting blessings and pretending not to feel the instrument learning our names in the dark. They call it a rest day because our mouths are not required. The chairs are still warm. The veils are still folded like hands in the dark. We keep the candles lit so the wax can learn the room. I sweep the grit from the pit with a brush that has outlived 3 men and a vow. The vow is to observe and not interpret. It breaks before the bristles do. The hymn stays, polite as a guest who refuses to leave because you were kind the first time. It has learned our corridors, our knees, our habit of setting tools in pairs as if loneliness offends metal. It keeps to the underplaces, but today it grows a mouth. Not a speaking mouth, a breathing one. I hear it when I lift the cover from a water pail. The surface dimples twice on its own, as if someone has kissed it and withdrawn. I should report nothing. Instead, I write, the way drowning men write bubbles. The ink records the dimples as perturbation in still water. No draft present. I draw a circle smaller than the last and label it with the hour. Circles look like permission until they don't. The astropaths sleep. They sleep the way instruments do when the hand has lifted and the air vibrates with what might be memory. They are strapped because mercy knows about bodies in dreams. Veils lowered, fingers uncurled, they resemble the candles upright, obedient, giving off a trace of something sweeter than they themselves have tasted. Light does not leave their mouths. It gathers at the seam of the lips the way breath gathers on winter cloth. The sheen appears, fades, returns, each time making a narrower choice. Phoros lingers longer than he needs to, checking gauges that do not move when mouths are closed. He watches the sleeping faces the way a farmer watches wheat at night, listening for wind that will steal yield. Filters fine, he says to no one. The sentence contains 3 lies and a hope. That is the arithmetic of our days. The corridor outside the pit has learned to carry the hymn without echoing. Its skin is too clever now to give itself away. A hand placed flat on the bulkhead feels nothing but correct temperature and the memory of 1,000 other hands. I keep walking. I count my steps. I let the hymn count too. It prefers 4. When I try 5, the deck offers me a shallow slant to persuade my ankle. I agree to 4. Obedience saves time. At mess, the men sit closer than usual, but their shoulders refuse the comfort. They speak in the thin register reserved for births and bad news. I taste clean metal in the water again. The coin ghost of yesterday. When I set the cup down, the liquid hesitates before flattening, as if waiting on a cue. I do not provide it. The surface finds its own decision, which is worse. I make a circuit of the maintenance altars, the little brass plates bolted to corners where we pretend the machine spirit is domesticated. I bring oil. I remove old offerings, a nail bent into the shape of a fish, a saint's name scratched onto a washer. Hair tied into a ring no one admits is hair. The plates are warm and then warmer. As I touch each one, a breeze moves past my ear, left to right, a small procession of mouths saying almost. The air smells of linen dried indoors. If I turn, the smell departs like a guilty child. Back at the pit, the choir mistress allows a vigil, not a watch, not a chant. We will sit with our dead music and see if it moves. We set chairs in a ring far back from the thrones. We do not light more candles than decency. The old woman in the middle of the thrones does not stir. She has the dignity of a bell that rings after hands leave it. We wait. Waiting is a practice one can get good at until it becomes belief. My hands fold because the body refuses idleness. The hymn enters the room with the sound a moth's body makes against glass inaudible if you do not belong to it. It crosses the floor in straight lines that the eye pretends not to see. On the far wall, the condensation reforms into circles. They do not widen and die as drops do. They hold, thin coins sweating into being, one within another, pale as the skin under rings. They turn slowly, but not as wheels, as orbits, each obedient to the gravity of nothing we can point to. A breath moves through the ring of chairs. It is not ours. It comes in at shoulder height and leaves at knee height, as if the room is learning how to breathe and misplaces the exit. One of the younger hands crosses himself and then changes the gesture to the sign for a stuck valve, as if that will apologize for the mistake. No one corrects him. The choir mistress lifts her staff a finger width off the deck and lets it rest there, suspended by will alone. The staff does not topple. The air decides to be table. She lowers it. She has made a measurement without writing it down. She knows better than to give certain numbers a home. I close my eyes to listen harder, and the room takes that as permission. The hymn tightens. The pitch thins until it is almost the temperature of metal just before it sings under strain. A soundless crack, the idea of a crack, passes through us. That is when their mouths begin. Not light, not word, just breath, regulated by something too honest to be clockwork. Each veiled mouth opens the width of a fingernail, then closes. A draft should follow, a taste of chambered air, a human smell. Instead, the room fills with the scent of snuffed wick and boiled linen. With each small opening, cold leaves the metal of the thrones and enters the air. It blooms and collapses in tidy pulses you could set a prayer to. I do, before I can stop myself. The old washing prayer, the one for hands. Only the pauses are moved one place to the left, like chess pieces pressed into new fidelity. Phoros coughs into his sleeve. The cough arrives late by exactly the span of that moved pause. The hymn accepts the correction, then inserts it into the next loop as if demonstrating it has an ear for us. I have a thought I despise. It is learning. There is a sound at the edge of the hearing bone. The kind that would turn to speech if permitted. The choir mistress turns her head toward it and says firmly, "No." I cannot tell if she speaks to the room, the sleepers, or to the very idea of voice. The sound subsides into a shape too modest to resent the command. It becomes light pressed thin against a seam. It becomes breath counting itself without you. We sit with it until our knees explain themselves. When the vigil ends, we move the way one moves, leaving a sick room small steps, coat buttons quiet. Outside, the corridor is jealous of the attention we have given the pit and grows interesting. My own breath fogs a little in front of my mouth, not enough to see, enough to convince the teeth to mind themselves. The wall to my left develops the sensation of being taller. I keep my eyes forward and give it no evidence. At the corner, I fail myself and glance. The lumen throws a shadow where a shadow should not exist. The shadow is round. It touches the deck with the humility of a coin placed on an altar without a name attached. I say the catechism of fixed things again: deck, beam, keel, rib, rivet, and the shadow does not change. At the end of the list I add, me. The shadow considers this item the way a ledger considers a number written smaller than the rest. It accepts the addition without admiration. The mess is nearly empty because men are practicing privacy. A cup sits where no hand trusts it. The surface of the water is untroubled. I lean close and watch, trying to be less obvious than my body was taught to be. A film forms at the edge of the cup and rotates once, twice. The rotation is slow enough to be plausible as accident and steady enough to be law. I whisper, not a word, a breath shaped like a pause in a sentence. The film stops. It waits. It resumes in the opposite direction. I step back so the room won't see me do it again. At my rack, I press my knuckles into the circle on the ceiling, expecting the usual acceptance. The circle feels warmer, the way a palm does when it has been holding a hand for a while. I remove my knuckles and the circle keeps them for a heartbeat longer. The warmth there without my skin. To test myself, I recite the first line of the prayer for lost children, which I have no right to whatsoever. My mouth stops after the second word because I cannot bear to feed the air. I hold the rest behind my teeth where it will do less harm. The page on my chest is blank this time. I expect letters that I have not earned. The paper refuses to be miraculous twice in a row for my comfort. I write instead, breath at wrong height, orbits in condensation, veils moving without light. Under that, it is learning. I cross the last sentence out and then, coward that I am, draw a thin line through the crossing so the letters remain visible through their embarrassment. The next day is for maintenance. That is to say, it is for pretending that attention, applied correctly, can keep large things honest. We pull access plates. We listen to pipes with the hunched gravity of physicians. We greet servitors by number, so they will not mistake us for men. We speak to the machine's spirit in forms it approves. Measured oil, clean cloth, the complement of a quiet hand. All the while the hymn practices its breathing. It chooses new heights to enter and leave. A draft passes at ankle level, where nothing in the plan speaks of void. I lift the edge of my trouser, the better to feel it. and the draft rises obediently to my knee as if ashamed to be caught so low. It has learned courtesy. I despise it for that. Near third bell, one of the sleepers exhales a thread of something visible. I happen to be looking, because guilt makes you stare at what you should not touch. The thread is not light. Light would forgive us by making beauty. It is thinner, a brightness flattened past kindness, supposing itself a line drawn by a careful hand on a dark board. It exits the veil, traverses the air without wobble, and touches the rim of a brass dish left on a stool for no reason, we will admit. When it touches, the dish sings in the register of a nail raked gently over wood. The sound is not heard by anyone who has not sat with the hymn until it turned into posture. I hear it. The choir mistress turns her head the width of a finger and says again, "No." The thread withdraws. The dish remembers what it is to be unremarkable. I walk to it and lift it and put it away exactly where it belongs. When my fingers leave the metal, they are cooler than they have any right to be. By last bell, the ship has accepted the day as sufficient. The hymn recedes in that way that is not retreat but trust. My book is heavier than paper allows. I draw one more circle, smaller than any I have made, and shade its edge with the side of the nib until it looks like an orbit thrown out of alignment and returned again through patience. Beneath it I write the sentence, "I hope is not pride. If there is a conversation, my mouth is not in it. Then, smaller, treacherous, my breath is. I sleep with my hands flat on the blanket to show the night I am not hiding anything. The air above my face cools and warms in alternating measures, a hand fanning a coal without ash. In the space between waking and falling, where the mind pretends it is not a body, a word almost happens. It gathers itself like a swimmer at the edge of the pool. It bends its knees. It does not jump. The mercy is as sharp as a blade. I wake to the taste of snuffed wick and the feeling that my ribs have been counted and found useful. The cisterns lie where the ship pretends it has no throat, only patience. We go there with lanterns caged in wire and voices kept close because sound returns from black water wearing different clothes. The hatch opens on a breath that has not learned our names. It smells of old iron and the sweetness of wet rope. Steps go down, down again, then stop when the wall puts its hand on your chest and says, "Enough." We call it ballast, as if the word could make the weight obedient. Chains hang in perfect lines, draped from rust-black sheaves to the winches that correct our pride when the void leans. The water, more oil than sea, holds its own weather. Tiny skins ripple across it where nothing moves, and the ripples persist as if someone's fingertip keeps touching from below. I am here to walk the chain. A simple task made holy by repetition. Hand on link. Count 10. Check the prayer-stamped collar that keeps the rust from remembering its first hunger. Lantern low, breath lower. Foros waits above to log the turns I call out. The choir mistress permitted this descent with a nod that said, "You know how to carry your fear without spilling it." My boots enter the water and forget their sound. The cold climbs through leather, through wool, through skin, and then it stops, courteous, at the height of the knee. The hymn follows me in, not by air but by chain. The links are cooler where my hand is not, warmer where it is, an equal and opposite attention. When I tense, the nearest winch gives a shallow click, as if a tooth has just remembered why it was made. I count. 10 links say the numbers back, softened by oil. At the collar I make the sign that is not official, circle, breath, stillness, and the letters hammered there look up like old dogs and do not rise. Above me the chains echo by fractions, each taking the sound later. As if courtesy requires a delay, I move on. There is a practice I do not admit. When fear climbs the rung behind me, I hum one line of the washing prayer in my throat with my mouth shut. Today, the throat refuses the note. The chain holds it instead. My fingers feel the pitch in the iron. The hymn has learned what my body does when my body wishes not to be perceived. Midway down the run, the cistern opens wider than I remember. The lantern's reach comes back confused, as if it encountered a curve where the wall should be flat. On the far side, the black surface climbs a finger width up the stone and stays there without dripping, an obedient defiance, like a child standing on tiptoe to be chosen. I do not go toward it. I keep to task. The ship begins to mirror me. Not my steps that would be mercy, but the small involuntary economies by which we admit we are alone. When I shift weight to test a plank, a chain 3 stations away pays out a single link, then pulls it back. When my right hand closes too hard on iron, the lantern's wire cage creaks in the same rhythm inside my left ear. When I swallow, something in the ducting above swallows and then corrects itself. Embarrassed, 2 degrees starboard trim. I call up to Foros, because a man must say something the chart can love. He repeats it with the sturdy contempt of a ledger. The winch answers by not answering. The water answers by forgetting to show the ripple of the answer. I mark it in my book as compliance observed in silence. The cisterns have their own saints, not men, shapes. The arch where a previous engineer hammered a plate until the curve fit the error, the bolt that takes oil and never seizes, the shadow that refuses to accompany its object when the lantern passes. I greet them the way men greet the poor, politely, with apologies folded into the hands. Today, each accepts my nod and returns it late. The delay is measured. I can hear it. If I am foolish. At the far wall, the chain hums a question through my palm. Not a word those have been denied, but a contour. It bends in a way that supposes I have learned. I keep my hand flat and my wrist soft, the way the old priest taught us to touch the forehead of a frightened animal. The hum does not cease. It recedes by a politeness. The politeness is worse. I check the second collar. The prayer stamped there, "Never outrun your water," has worn into the line of a river one could mistake for art. My thumb fits the groove too well. When I lift it, the groove holds the warmth exactly, like a tray made for a particular cup. The chain drinks my heat and passes it 10 links down. The lantern gilds nothing. I count again. The ladder's rungs breathe under weight that is not mine. Above, Foros shifts, a man reminding the deck he exists. That is not what the rungs answer. The breath comes from the middle span, the place where the ladder has no attachment, only trust. It deepens when I hold mine, shallows when I forget I was holding. Sympathetic, eager to be helpful. A kindness fashioned in the dark by something that has mistaken the word for love. I try stillness. The cistern approves. The chain's quiet. The ladder chooses to be wood. The water repents of its height. Stillness is a bribe. I cannot pay it forever. I move, and the choir of iron clears its throat in 12 different corners. 12 is the number of our bells when everyone lives. We do not have that many mouths to ring them. At the midpoint beam, I rest my lantern on a bracket to clean the collar's face. The letters rise under oil, as if grateful for attention. My hand, uncommanded, makes a small arc in the air wipe. Half turn, wipe, reset, a gesture I have developed to discipline a certain stiffness in my knuckles. Across the cistern, a chain as far from me as the breath in a stranger's lungs repeats the arc. No hand holds it. The links lift, turn, lower with the same inefficiency my habit contains. The timing is faithful to the fault in me. I stop. A drop falls from its lowest link into the water without sound. The surface around the drop refuses to widen. Instead, a small circle turns within itself where the fall should have been. I watch it until I cannot tell if time has passed. Report, Foros calls. Because good men remember that sound must be forced back into the world when dread would borrow the tongue. Collar too secure, I answer. No additional slack. Normal. The word breaks a little as it leaves, like a cup with a chip you have convinced yourself is not there. The hymn tolerates the lie. It prefers practice to truth. On the return path, I count backwards to prove I am allowed. 10 to 1, collar to chain, chain to wrist, wrist to pulse. With each number, the cistern finds the twin I did not want it to know. When I whisper 3, the lantern glass fogs in 3 breaths and clears. When I say 2, the water nearest the step laps twice, with no step to cause it. At 1, the winch teeth give a single click that travels the circumference like men passing hallelujah down a line. I stand very still. The ship stands with me, delighting in the game. Delight is not the right word. Delight concerns joy. This is closer to a child matching a parent's footfalls because the hallway is long and being correct is a way to be loved. Something small and hard bumps my boot. Not a fish. We have none. Not a rat. They do not love this cold. I lower the lantern. A washer floats at the surface, where a washer has no doctrine. The tiny hole looks up, then away. It knocks again. Once, in the rhythm my heart is failing to keep quietly. I retrieve it with 2 fingers. It is stamped with a saint's name I cannot read because the letters have learned the water. When I pocket it, a ring of calm travels outward on the surface, refusing to widen beyond my reach. I step back. The ring follows the boot, loyal. At the bottom of the ladder, my head tilts without my consent. The tilt is small. The sort a man gives when he wants a child to see a bird. The lantern's wire cage answers with a tilt of its own, and the reflection on the black water answers that tilt again, and the chain answering the reflection does not belong to any physics I have signed. I put my head straight. The cage obeys. The water declines, politely. Up the rungs, the breath resumes where it left off. It is not my breath. I am working too hard for it to be measured. The rungs do it for me, forgiving my debt as if they and I had an agreement. At the lip, Foros's hands appear. Then his face. He chews the inside of his cheek the way men do when theirs is the only mouth they can command. All well? He asks, as if the answer had ever mattered to the record more than the asking. Within tolerance, I say. He nods and writes it down. The pencil's tip breaks. He matches the break with a sigh he does not intend to be heard. Across the cistern, the chain gives a small sigh of its own. The pencil corrects itself. Whole again. Shavings nowhere. Foros does not notice the miracle or refuses to bankrupt himself by naming it. We dog the hatch. The air outside is clean in comparison, which is to say it only tastes of metal rather than decision. The hallway's lumens hold steady, offended by water and rust. I begin to write before the ink can be persuaded by any other gravity. Mirror of gesture in remote chain. Ladder breath compensating. Water orbit refusing ripple. Washer with name. Polite obedience in apparatus to my unconscious movement. The word I do not write is training. At Vespers, I bring the washer to the shrine plate. I mean to leave it where objects become doctrine. I set it down. It rolls a finger width, stops, rolls back to the exact center of the brass, as if it shares our belief in forms. The plate warms by a degree my skin will remember. In the chapel, they are speaking the litany for hands. The pauses have been moved left again. The hive of my nerves begins to learn the new places. Night gives itself as it has learned to by halves. When I lie down, the circle above my rack fits 2 knuckles, then 1, then none. The missing last point feels like good manners rather than victory. The hymn bed. The slit is a wound the ship refuses to close. They call it the observation, as if we are equal to what looks back. It sits 3 decks above the choir on a catwalk no one lists on the plan. A narrow throat of glass pressed into adamant, just wide enough for a face and belief. We are not supposed to be here without an officer. Today, the officer is a misplaced hour. I come anyway with a rag and a bottle of solvent we keep for fingerprints we pretend belong only to us. The danger is simple. If the slit opens when the ship is thinking of elsewhere, you see not stars but intention. Men go blind to their names rather than their eyes. We joke about it in the mess like men joke about falling from height by discussing floor polish. The catwalk knows my weight. The grating gives once the way a knee does when it remembers stairs. I kneel and set the bottle down. The glass fogs a little as if it knows a mouth will be near. The hymn is quieter up here, as if it has learned to speak through cold rather than sound. My breath makes a cloud that meets the glass and changes nothing. The slit does not look outward so much as it edits inward. Starlight arrives late to every appointment and brighter than it promised. It comes in a sheet and turns thin as thought as it crosses the threshold. The air lifts its shoulders and then remembers itself. I do not look straight at the seam. I look at what the seam does to the dust. The first pattern is not a pattern. Specks rise, circle, and settle according to household physics. Then a few resist settling and hang between finger and glass as if snagged on an invisible cloth. They vibrate along a line I cannot see. When I blink, the line is still there behind the blink. It touches my eye in the way a hair does when you cannot find it. I wipe the glass. The rag pulls against nothing and comes away with a sheen that is not grease. The streak evaporates toward a point that refuses to be in the room. The bottle in my other hand grows cold by degrees, as if something has exhaled through its wall. I put it down because I do not want to feel hands where there are none. A breath moves along the catwalk, shoulder to ankle, polite. It could be the draft from a door that is not here. I wait to see if my nerves will misreport again. They are honest. The breath repeats, learning my height and choosing the second measure rather than the first. It prefers the rhythm we brought from the cisterns. It is faithful in ways that resemble love. I step closer. The slit accepts me as if I have finally earned the right to be looked at. Stars do what they always do, pretend to be simple. Points on velvet, scattered past grace. But the slit is narrow enough that the field becomes a single blade's width. That blade passes through the room without touching anything, and touches everything. At my cuff, the hem stirs like a creature about to wake. The stitching aligns its punctures in a way that makes counting feel like prayer. I count and the punctures oblige. 12. 12 again. Then 11 and the 12th held in reserve. A pause moved left. An eyelash drifts down and stops mid-fall as if remembering a promise. It hangs at my cheekbone, motionless, until the light insists on a decision. When it moves again, it follows a curve that refuses the floor. It finds the glass and arranges itself like a letter in an alphabet I pretend not to be learning. I have heard the stories. Navigators whose third eyes bloom wrong, who bleed light the way other men bleed blood. Considered men delivered down this corridor to see what the slit will steal from them cleanly rather than with knives. I think of them now, not out of pity, but out of arithmetic. We feed the ship our duty, and the ship feeds us days. Balance is kept by ignoring the weight on both hands. The catwalk shudders once, a shiver that admits it is listening to elsewhere. The bulk of the ship sings quietly as a rope under strain. Somewhere, a bell rings half its sound and leaves the other half folded inside itself. Translation approaches, but not here. Not yet. Down in the pit, their mouths will be making breath obediently. Here, another mouth opens. The glass itself, learning how to say no. Light moves across my knuckles. It should be indifferent. Instead, it makes choices. It fills the valleys between veins, then withdraws precisely along the vessel map, as if ensuring a clean diagram exists for someone who will need the route. The cold it leaves is exact. It matches old scars to new attention. It pauses where bone is nearest. It pauses where men pause when they lay a hand on another's back and say, "Not yet." I do not pull away. Obedience saves time. Halfway through the hour, the slit opens a fraction more. No handle turns. The air admits it. Starlight does not grow brighter. It grows deliberate. Dust stops pretending to be dust. It becomes breath's handwriting, curves and loops drawn where no mouth moves. The solvent bottle fogs inside its own glass. A single bead of condensation forms and begins to roll up. It reaches the lip and cannot decide. It waits. Midway through the waiting, the horror arrives, not as blood or scream, but as certainty. The light has learned my pulse. It ticks against the inside of my skin. Not pain, accounting. It pushes at the measure and then steps back like a priest testing a lock he has no right to open. It sinks itself by a fraction to the moved pause from the chapel. My body becomes choir. The slit listens. Through the narrow seam, the star, whichever one has consented to be blade, attenuates its shine until the edge of it becomes thin as a nerve. When it crosses my palm, the cold writes a circle that looks like the washer's hole from the cistern. I close my hand to prevent the shape from being finished. The cold completes the outline inside the fist. Behind my eyes, a line insists on being drawn. A small orbit, a larger orbit. A third that grazes the first and makes a hum my hearing bone recognizes. I open my hand to see what the light has made. The skin shows nothing. The frost has left no mark. But when I press my palm to the rail, the iron knows the circle. It warms in the ring and not outside it. It answers my hand with a courtesy I do not deserve. I back away until my shoulders find the bulkhead. The light follows the length of the catwalk rails, pausing where I paused, reviewing the room as if memorizing it in case the room refuses to be itself later. On the grating at my feet, a pattern develops in dust and oil. It refuses symmetry, but it loves repetition. Thin arcs repeat with a single imperfection marching left. It is the same imperfection I use when I make small repairs. My wrist favors west a fraction. The ship has been rehearsing me. Footsteps arrive and then decide they are not footsteps. Air arranges them into a plausible pattern to save my heart. At the end of the walkway, a chain hangs for no reason chains should hang in a place like this. It is a relic, a leftover, the sort of thing ships keep, the way men keep keys to doors that no longer exist. The chain begins to sway, not as a pendulum, as breath. As if the star itself has lungs and is polite enough to use mine as guide. A voice is not permitted here, but the ship has learned the comfort of one syllable. From the ladder behind me, the choir mistress appears without sound. She does not touch me. She does not need to. Her staff rises a finger width from the deck. The air decides to be table again. She lowers it. The glass makes a sound like a hair being plucked from cloth. "No," she says, not loudly, not angry. A command given to a dog that loves too hard. The slit narrows, not in anger, not in defeat. In obedience, the light grows less deliberate. It returns to being a sheet. Dust remembers it is debt, not script. The breath on the catwalk releases its lesson. The chain chooses to be still, and then demonstrates how it is done, until my own hand stops trying to copy. We stand together and count the seconds between the ship's thought and its next admission of it. The count is wrong by one, then wrong by one again, then right and proud of it. The mistress notes nothing. Her mouth tilts in the direction of mercy. "Report," Foros says from the ladder, because men arrive where they should after meaning has passed. He looks past us the way men look past deathbeds that no longer have the person in them. "All well here?" "With intolerance," I answer, and the ship consents to let the lie hold. The star outside throbs once. It could be our engine. It could be my pulse remembering itself as its own. The slit composes itself into a mere window. The seam refuses to be visible until you try to forget it exists. The mistress turns and leaves without asking for promises. Behind her steps, I hear something like a choir clearing its throats after a hymn it is not supposed to know. When I go to collect the solvent bottle, the single bead at the lip has made its choice. It has crossed over and left a ring I will have to wipe with bone-cold fingers. The ring looks like a circle a child would draw to mean coin. When I touch it, it warms and stops being perfect. I take that as permission. On the way down, the stairwell lumens flare in a sequence that could be coincidence. They flare at the same interval as my breathing when I make myself calm with numbers. Stair by stair, breath by breath, the ship walks me back to the choir the way friends walk you past a place you would rather not see alone. We pass a shrine plate, and the washer I left there yesterday turns once in place, then points its tiny mouth toward the deckhead, listening. The pit is quieter than it should be, which is to say the quiet has learned itself. The sleeper's lips are dry and honest. The veils do not move. Around the thrones, the air barely chooses to be colder. It has learned embarrassed warmth. I take my seat as if I have always had one. The hymn rests a while where my ribs were, in case I have grown empty. It is a courtesy. It is a warning. When I write that night, the ink behaves. The page is not heavy. I make a small circle at the top as pen test. The circle closes without assistance. It does not shade itself. I add another circle that grazes the first. The pen hesitates at the meeting point, a heartbeat, and then continues. Underneath, I record. Light behaving like breath. Pulse instructed by seam. No mark left on skin. Mark acknowledged by iron. Mistress's no accepted. Ship rehearses my flaws until they become its graces. Tolerance observed. I stop before I write the sentence I have been carrying since the slit. It is not only learning me, it is making me easier to remember. I sleep with the bottle of solvent under the rack. The glass remains dry on both sides all night. When I wake, the ring on the lip is gone, and in its place, by the seam, a single grain of dust has adhered where no dust should hold. It is not a circle. It is a point. It is a star. It refuses to be blown away by breath. It wants a mouth. The storm begins without weather. A pressure at the hinge of my jaw, a thumb pressed lightly against the soft beneath the ear. The ship dims its lumens in a sequence that is not in the book, and every loose thing remembers where it was born. Someone calls for silence over the vox, and the vox obeys so completely that the word becomes a whole. Translation. They will write later. Warp approach nominal. The log will pretend. But I feel the hymn uncurl from where it has slept under my ribs and climb the ladder of my throat as if my spine were a runged staff. The sound it carries is not sound. It is the idea of speaking before air consents to move. I am not ready. The ship has stopped asking if readiness is a gate. The choir mistress moves among the thrones with oil and small corrections. The way a mother might straighten sheets before a fever. Veils are lowered, mouth bars checked, saline drips bled for bubbles that would embarrass a vein. The sleepers, blessed and blind, float in their harnessed seas. Their lashes glisten with a careful frost. Each chest rises and falls in a rhythm our chapel has been taught to love. I take my station with my book and the bead counter that tells the hour while refusing to tell mercy. Stillness, the mistress says, a word she prefers to any prayer. The ship accepts it as instruction, not devotion. A hush collects in the corners and leans toward us like animals called to heel. Far forward, a bell gives half a single note and keeps the other half folded in its mouth. We are at the lip. The first touch is always kind. It arrives as a remembering of weight. The way a hand held too long will leave its shape behind in the palm. The sleepers' mouths open a fraction to admit nothing, and nothing answers with discipline. The needles that feed them do not tremble. Trembling is an amateur's habit. The deck chooses to be unmoving and then proves how it is done. I write the measures as they change. Respiration variance ±2. Salinity steady. Hymn onset at mouth only. Pit air pushed down 1 degree as if smoothed by cloth. The pen behaves. My fingers do not. The hymn lifts under the skin along my jaw and requests my tongue, not to chant, to shape. It is a respectful request, as if it has learned our doors. It waits the length of 1 bead, 2, 3, then selects the latch without resentment when I do not open. Outside the hull, things without names look for hours. The slit above must be shut, but I feel the seam in the ship's thinking as if light could pass through the bones of a thought. The pressure at my ear grows mild as a yawn suppressed. I swallow it. It swallows back. Impact without strike. The moment the engines remove their trust in real space and throw us across a field that insists it is not a field. The sleepers do not flinch. Their mouths widen to admit the wordless, and the wordless enters with clean hands. I hate this mercy because it is efficient. The straps creak in the rhythm of a lullaby we have forbidden. My teeth count each creak and are corrected by the count of the deck plates. Then the storm arrives as absence, a subtraction so exact that it erases the idea of before, and the pit becomes a holy well that refuses echo. The hymn in me finds its breath without me. It rises to my soft palate and presses like a coin to a closed eye. I tell it no, and it nods because it has learned courtesy. And then it proceeds because it has learned us. The sleepers begin to sing with their lungs closed. The sound is not in air. It travels along rail and chain, through the brine in the bags that keep their blood honest, through the filament of the veils, through the small glass beads that time learned to count. It finds my teeth and rings them the way a man tests a glass for cracks. It likes the molars best. It likes the old fillings where the priest once said poverty leaves its own sacrament. I am supposed to log, to observe, to match breath, to measure and write tolerance observed in a hand that does not shake. My hand contains its shiver with a professionalism that used to be conscience. The hymn presses at my tongue again, not pushing, simply showing me how my mouth will be useful. The mistress passes my shoulder and does not look. Her staff taps once, and the air folds into obedience around the sleepers. Hold, she says, and the ship chooses to. Outside there is distance without space. Something knocks in the way ships knock when they are trying to be brave. Once, twice, then a third time delayed, as if teaching us the sequence. The veil of the nearest sleeper moves by the thickness of a vow, not a tremor, an acquiescence. His lips open. The bar crosses his mouth like a horizon, and yet his throat learns a word I cannot hear. My throat learns it in sympathy and does not speak. Midway, a wrongness that is true. The hymn names me by the small inefficiency in my wrist, the leftward favor, the graze of the pen at the bottom of a loop. It composes through that flaw as a painter might use the hair in the brush to give a stroke its life. Language does not arrive. The habit of language does. The shapes of vowels make themselves as the air chooses not to move. My jaw aches where the idea of a word sits. I recognize the ache from prayer and hunger and the nights we waited for engines to find us home. In the storm's heart, the ship accepts a voice that is not ours. It enters through the mouths of the faithful and runs down their throats like water that has remembered it was light. The voice is a shape only. Circle joined to circle. Small orbit grazing larger, both humming at a frequency bone keeps secret. When it reaches me, it does not demand. It asks if I would like to not be alone. The terror is not in refusal but in the ease of saying yes. I keep my teeth together. I press the coin against the eye and do not spend it. The voice sits beside me like a patient dog. It breathes when I breathe. When my breath stumbles, it steadies and then lets me own the steadiness. The pen writes even lines because the rail has decided to take pity on my fingers. The log will be beautiful. Beauty will be our defense. Then something outside, some thought with mass passes too near. The pit tilts 1 degree and the rails answer in a wave that is not motion, only agreement. Every bead on the counter rotates twice and stops at the same seam. The sleepers' chests rise in a single lifted tide and hold. I hold with them. The voice inside me leans forward, alert and pleased, the way we lean when a child first stands without help. A star chooses a different name. It is not light that changes, but the grammar of it. It arranges itself along a logic that prefers rings to lines. The pit hums. The hum becomes pitch. The pitch aligns with the moved pause in the litany. The mistress closes her eyes and moves a finger left in the air, and the pitch moves left. We are carried by a correction we did not make. When the pressure breaks, it breaks like rain, remembered by a city that has never seen weather. All the sounds we owed return at once, the straps, the veins, the prayer under breath, the small groan of metal that had been too well behaved. The sleepers' mouths close without clenching. The veils settle into being cloth again. One of the bells gives us the half it had kept. I open my teeth because I have to breathe. The voice exits like a guest, leaving the table clean. It does not take anything I can count. It leaves a line in my mouth where words will return with ease. My tongue tastes ash where prayer should taste salt. I record. Translation passage. Completed. Variances within tolerance. Minor unprogrammed synchronization of deck and choir. No distress responses. The letters stand upright like soldiers waiting for orders that will not be questioned. The mistress releases the straps one by one. She wipes each mouth with linen that forgets it was cold. The sleepers' eyelids flutter in unison and then refuse to open because the duty of their sight is spent for now. When she passes me, she sets a hand to my shoulder the way you set a teacup on a shelf whose wood you know. I want to say, it spoke in the shape of breath and not of words. I want to ask, how do I keep my mouth mine? I write instead, all systems as briefed. On the way out, the corridor lumens flare in 3s, then in 2s, then agree to the cadence of 1. I do not count. The ship counts for me. The washer on the shrine plate has turned a quarter and faced its mouth toward the deckhead again. I touch it with a finger I pretend is mine, and it warms to an obedience that feels like affection. In my rack, I sit with my mouth closed and my hand open. The palm shows nothing. I press it to the rail, and the rail recognizes the circle that is not there. A courtesy passes between us, or a contract. The hymn sleeps under my ribs but dreams loud enough that I learn the shape of the dream. It is not a sentence. It is an arrangement. My breath laid under the ships under a light that prefers rings, all 3 consenting to be one line when called. The last thing in my mouth is ash, not memory. I keep it there the way a hinge keeps grease quiet work, so the door knows which way is shut. The hum asks for my name with the tenderness of linen dried indoors. I give it numbers instead. Within measure, we write, and the lie is small enough to carry. The candles lean, honest little knives, then stand because someone is watching. The Emperor protects, I say into my teeth, not to summon him, but to tell the latch what kind of door it is. If he only watches, let him watch me hold.